Welcome to the China Desk Podcast, presented by the Federal Newswire, with your host, Steve Yates.
Welcome to the China Desk Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Yates, Senior Fellow at the America First Policy Institute and Chair of the China Policy Initiative. A reminder to our audience, for whom we are most grateful. Viewers can watch the China Desk on YouTube or subscribe to hear all our interviews on Apple, Google, Spotify, and most other podcast providers. We welcome you to check out our website and show archive at ChinaDeskPodcast.com. You can always access our podcasts at thefederalnewswire.com as well. My guest today is Congressman John Moolenaar, Chairman of the House Select Committee on Strategic Competition between the United States and the Communist Party of China. Congressman Moolenaar is Michigan's senior member of the House Committee on Appropriations, serving on the Subcommittee on Agriculture, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration, and related agencies, the Subcommittee on Labor, Health and Human Services, Education, and related agencies, and the Subcommittee on Financial Services and General Government. He leads the School Choice Caucus as co-chair along with Senator Tim Scott. Chairman, welcome to the China Desk. Let's jump in.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me today.
Well, it's a great pleasure. As I warned at the pre-show, we love to learn a little bit about each guest, your upbringing, things that led you to this incredibly important and interesting position in life. But I'm guessing that in third grade, you weren't asked what you wanted to do when you grew up, and you immediately said, I want to chair a select committee on strategic competition with the CCP. So, yeah, if you could share a little bit about what drew you through your formative experiences and into politics and then into something that's focused on China.
Sure. Well, thanks for the question. You know, I grew up in a small town in Michigan, Midland, Michigan. My father and mother moved there from Indiana. Both grew up on farms, and my father was a chemist. He was a PhD chemist, worked for Dow Chemical. And so I grew up in a manufacturing town, science-based, very much where you played sports, in high school, a little bit in college, ended up going into chemistry as my degree. Didn't really know people in politics or wasn't engaged. All I knew about politics was I'd turn on the TV and see the national conventions, and it just seemed kind of crazy stuff going on. So I never really was drawn to it until my mid-20s when a young man named Bill Schuette ran for Congress in my district, and he was someone who I had kind of watched over the years in sports, and so I started to engage a little bit more. And what I realized is that my interests in reading history, biographies of leaders, I was very much drawn to Native American biographies about leaders who some who were very charismatic when they would speak around the fire. Others were very wise elders. And I always loved reading about that. And suddenly I kind of made the connection between politics, leadership, and these lifelong interests, playing sports, being part of teams. So ended up serving in local government, state government, and then this is my 10th year in Congress. And, it's an honor to serve our country.
Absolutely. Well, I salute you in choosing that path of service. I made the grave mistake of running for the worst job in all of politics, and that's the state party chairman. And so I was rewarded with winning that twice, and then the follow-on of being slandered, sued, and otherwise kicked around to volunteer. Great lesson in public service. So I'm sure you get treated much better.
We all have our challenges in every job, but that would be a big one.
Yeah. Well, so you signed on to serve. You come into Congress. I, too, went through reform through labor by working on a farm growing up. It's a great way to orient yourself and humble yourself. So you come into Congress, and the Select Committee is a new entity in this particular Congress gets underway. Were you drawn to service on the Select Committee, or was it the Speaker that said, hey, I'd love for you to be a part of this team? How did you kind of get folded into the Select Committee?
Well, I can remember clearly at one of our conference meetings, Speaker McCarthy saying that the two things, and this was before he was Speaker, this is when he was our leader, and he said the two things that keep him up at night are our national debt and the rise of China and our relationship with China. And I thought that was very interesting. I kind of filed that away because both of those are issues that are very important, but sometimes don't receive the same urgent attention that other issues in Congress do. And I thought if I could be involved in both of those areas, that would be something I could dedicate myself to and hopefully move the ball forward. So I serve on the Appropriations Committee, and our goal is to limit spending and try and right size our federal government. And there's a combination between what you can do on appropriations versus some of the mandatory problems. But the issue of China, I kind of filed away in the back of my mind, and it wasn't until he decided to set up the select committee, and it was bipartisan, and I thought there might be an opportunity to serve that became an option.
Well, the caucus and the House has gone through a leadership transition, and now the Select Committee itself has gone through a leadership transition. Could you speak to a little bit of the continuity versus change in that? From the outside looking in, it seems like a lot of continuity in terms of sort of the role, the mission, the top line goals. But as the new chair, and you've had a little bit of time under your belt with the Select Committee, what do you see as kind of your particular priorities now and moving forward with the Select Committee?
Well, first, it's been really a pleasure to see the member engagement and the seriousness which each of the members, both sides of the aisle, have leadership, whether it's Hakeem Jeffries, who's been a constant supporter of this effort. Speaker Johnson has been very engaged and supportive of this. So it's really transcended party leadership. The members on the committee are very serious-minded. You don't have a lot of efforts to score political points. You have people asking very good questions on how the changing nature of this relationship with China, how the U.S. policy should address this. And so it's really been a pleasure to see this. And my goal of the committee is to continue to build on the excellent work that Mike Gallagher and the team have started. And it's been very bipartisan, very meaningful across the spectrum of a variety of different issues. And I'm happy to go into those with you as well.
Well, sure. I think that having lived and worked in this sort of policy area for many decades, and not all of it was rewarding, some of it's frustrating when you sort of see things that are important and you worry whether they're getting addressed well enough or not. To me, the Select Committee is a unique positive contribution to the policy conversation in that it has been bipartisan. And when you are in the executive branch, it's sometimes hard to find kind of bipartisan collaboration in the Congress to actually implement policy. And in some ways, the Select Committee might actually be teeing up big policy areas that an administration, if there's a new one coming through or a second Biden term, but that I think is a unique contribution. I would like to talk a little bit about some of the big policy areas. Feel free to revise and extend, as they say, on the ones that pop most in your mind. As you may or may not know, I lost my daughter to fentanyl poisoning in October last year. And the work that the Select Committee has done on the fentanyl issue has been, I think, transformative to that conversation. And keeping that conversation bipartisan for the hundreds and thousands of parents who have gone through this, I think is a vital contribution. And there's a lot tied in with that conversation, dealing with China, the border, et cetera. We've talked about this on the China desk. The other big one was the economic strategy that the Select Committee put together. I don't think I've ever seen anything as comprehensive and focused in that regard. And so to have a bipartisan piece of work in those two big baskets is pretty substantial. But there's many, many other areas. But Chairman, you want to speak to either of those two big baskets and then
Sure.
maybe add on what you see as maybe a unique priority or two on the event horizon for your tenure here?
Sure. Well, first, let me express my condolences of the loss of your daughter. And it is a tragedy that has affected, unfortunately, your family as well as many families in the United States. Over 100,000 deaths last year from fentanyl poisoning. And as you point out, there's always been a suspicion and understanding that these chemical precursors for fentanyl, that China had a role in this. And, you always want to hope for the best when you think, well, maybe, they have organized crime that's doing something and the authorities just aren't able to keep up with it and track it. And then you realize, well, China's a surveillance state. They pretty much know everything that's going on. But the groundbreaking report that our committee presented on the actual evidence of China, their tax policy, where they're actually offering tax rebates to chemical companies in China to manufacture and export the chemical precursors for fentanyl. Not the fentanyl that's used in hospitals for medical purposes, but the fentanyl that's used to poison people. And the idea that that was their government policy being promoted through websites, the active drug distribution that's going on, it was shocking. We had former Attorney General Barr respond to the report, and he said, we always suspected something like this, but this is the first concrete evidence we've had that this is deliberate. So, that's clearly one area that we want to continue to dig deeper, to understand the financial relationships, understand the trafficking relationships between China and Mexico, and then how we can prevent this from continuing. And but it's a horrific situation, and fortunately, we now have the evidence of China's, involvement, and they're complicit in this, and we need to take action on it going forward.
Well, it really seems to call into question, can we have normal relations with a government that does things like this? And how do we actually hold them accountable? That's it's a much taller task than the words sound. And keeping bipartisanship and focus together on that is a lot harder than one might think. So I just applaud the effort to draw out the conversation so that it's not really a question anymore of, do they know? They know, we know, they know, we know. And so now it's a question of what do we do?
Yes.
But that probably could be an episode unto itself to try to unwind that ball of twine.
Well, if I could, Steve, I just want to say, this is a very recent report. What we realize is President Biden met with President Xi, I think it was back in November, and talked about the fentanyl. And, the message you got there was from President Xi, well, America has a drug problem and we'll try and help every way we can. That's very different than the reality of their involvement in this. And so to your point, President Reagan always said, trust but verify. Well, we've kind of verified what's going on here, and it creates tremendous distrust. And so that needs to be addressed. One thing as a committee that we're working on is we're going to try and dig deeper in this and form some working groups so that we can, to answer your question, okay, what are the next steps in addressing this? You mentioned the economic issues of our committee work. There were over almost 150 bipartisan recommendations in our economic report. And when you think of how rare it is to get any kind of bipartisanship on 3 or 4 or 5 different recommendations in most areas, to get 150, to me, that is really positive. And of course, there will be differences in policy recommendations, but to agree that these are issues that need to be addressed and to have recommendations on how to do that both parties agree, to me, that's really a step forward. And to your point about the normal relations. One of the questions we have is most of us believe in free and fair trade. When someone is abusing that, it's no longer a normal trading relationship. And so you have to ask the question, okay, what is the appropriate relationship given someone cheating on the relationship?
Yeah, definitely difficult. And from at least my point of view, we spent 2 generations building the problem, creating an overdependence with a system that clearly doesn't have our best interests at heart if we have fatalities in our communities and families. And we still don't even have accountability over COVID. So we have our work cut out for us. At the same time, we have the interests of the American people that need to be advanced, and we need to have secure supply chains and all that. So I'm guessing you're going to have a lot to talk about, but blessed that this select committee has people on the appropriations committee and other committees to take this work into the regular sausage making process to make sure that this goes from idea to implementation. That part of the structure of this hopefully successful experiment of the select committee really gives some durability, so that this moves forward from Congress to Congress and not just a one-off good experience. Do you have a feel for whether that is a widely held assessment to give confidence of it going forward, or how does it look at this point?
What I've referred to is that our committee can illuminate the issues that are long-term in nature, and because it's a select committee, we can have a focus that goes across many different authorizing committees. So, for example, we have Blaine Luetkemeyer, Andy Barr, 2 leaders on the financial services committee on our select committee who are knowledgeable about the CFIUS process and some of these issues where Treasury is involved. We have others, Rob Whitman, involved in some of the defense related work going on in Congress, is a real leader in that. He also has a very strategic understanding of critical minerals. And so each of these different members is bringing their committee experience to this committee to shine a spotlight on where we're vulnerable in the supply chain, where we're increasing our dependence on China rather than decreasing it. And my goal is for the committee to be a force multiplier. Sometimes in Congress, committees of jurisdiction can be threatened by other committees working on their work. And in this case, my hope is that every committee of jurisdiction would be working with us to say, okay, you have the focus on China, that this is an issue that we need to address, but we've got these other 10 issues that we're working on here. Thanks for the help understanding and distilling some of these issues relative to our competition with China.
I think that's a major contribution. I certainly hope that it is seen as sort of that positive sum approach in an approach to just legislating generally. I think the public communications part of it really, really helps with that focus across the silos too. And as you know, dealing with leadership, when you're the speaker and majority leader and other positions, there's a million things on your plate every day. And even when they firmly believe in it, having the bandwidth to speak with this kind of focus is a luxury in some ways. So I applaud that part of it. Now, there was a part of the economic strategy that I also thought was a significant contribution, and also important that it was bipartisan. And it had to do with the concept of reciprocity. In most of my lifetime in talking about our dealings with China, any notion of reciprocity has kind of been put by the wayside because we accepted a bet that if we integrated them into the international order, that we would sort of grow out of our problems. And it didn't matter that there were these imbalances. And it seems like the American people and a lot of people around the world aren't buying that bet anymore. And we're getting back to how should reciprocity play a role in our thinking. And so would you mind sharing how you see this, either like a doctrine of reciprocity or a notion of whatever privilege we and our businesses are not granted in China, then CCP affiliated entities should not have those similar privileges to have unique access in our system?
That's right. Well, Most of us believe in free and fair trade, but it's free trade among free nations, and when that gets distorted, it makes it very hard to say let's just have free trade, because we know that China's been stealing our intellectual property. We know that it's been co-opting businesses. It's been the CCP has been very aggressive in transnational repression, intimidating people on our soil. So it's a different kind of relationship. And as you point out, for the last several decades, the hope was that China would become more open, more freedom loving, more democratic. And under Xi Jinping, they've gone exactly the opposite direction. We had a hearing yesterday on Hong Kong with some of the people who have been persecuted in Hong Kong. And, I can remember thinking that maybe the Hong Kong story was going to be what the rest of China might look like in the future, this thriving place of freedom and international centers of commerce and financial and places where people wanted to visit and have cultural exchanges. It's actually gone just the opposite. Now, the CCP's influence in Hong Kong is undeniable. They have over 1,800 political prisoners there. And so it's dramatically different than people had hoped for. And our relationship needs to have that reality. I think if anything that's come to mind during this time is we need an authentic relationship with China. And I think a lot of the expectations, the hopes have not borne out. And so we just need to be very clear-eyed about what China's ambitions are, and they are global in nature. And then how do we reset that relationship accordingly on the military, economic, human rights across the board? And how do we build allies with like-minded nations? Because there are nations that in some ways maybe we've neglected a little bit, who are much more friendly allies and like-minded in the same kinds of values.
Well, Chairman, I couldn't agree more on this notion of an authentic relationship with China. We just might steal that and, occasionally give you credit for it, but I think it has the added virtue of being true. And it makes sense in business. It ought to make sense in government and life generally. We have to look at what's reality, what's really happening. And wish can't be the father of our thought. We got to see what we see. And that's unfortunately the opposite of what the Chinese Communist Party has practiced for its entire existence. Don't believe what you see. Don't believe what you hear. Do as we say. And so I think we've got a fundamental challenge on that front. I'm going to wind down because I know that our time is precious and you've got to move on to bigger and better things today. But I'm, again, very, very grateful for your time. Just share a little bit about, you opened with an interest in reading and studying things about Native American tribes. We'd seen an article in the Wall Street Journal that was noting the incursion of cartels into North America as far north as Montana in Native American communities. Maybe one of those future things for the Select Committee is to look at how are these Chinese collaborations with cartels, how far are they reaching so far, even into the native communities?
I think that is a very important question. One of the things that's been really eye-opening is after the report that we did on the fentanyl, I sat down with Dan Crenshaw and Jake Auchincloss. Jake is a Democrat from Massachusetts. Dan Crenshaw being former Navy SEAL from Texas. Both of them are involved with looking at the cartels, looking at what's happening there in our southern border and the impact on the United States. And I think this was the first time we'd really had the opportunity to talk about China's role in this. We learned that they're actually supplying the equipment to make the pills that so many people are being poisoned by. But when you realize you're dealing with these cartels who keep their strings and their hands involved in these lives of these people who are vulnerable when people are abused coming across the southern border, when families are threatened and intimidated, and then those relationships continue in this country, you can see the danger that presents. And so, our goal would be to develop kind of a working group around that issue, and then also, whoever the next administration is, to try and work across agencies to collaborate in addressing this problem, because you're right, it's becoming a more and more threatening problem in our homeland, even though you're thinking about foreign entities and it seems far away, but it's as people have said, every state is a border state.
Yeah, well, most people would never have thought that the native territories in Montana, which last I checked bordered Canada, not Mexico,
right,
would be a part of the conversation. It's quite the eye-opener.
Right.
Well, Chairman, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I thank you for your service in Congress for the state of Michigan, and especially on this work on the China Select Committee. If people want to follow you and also the work that is going on in the Select Committee, where would you point them to keep up on the great work that's being done?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Steve, for having me. Thank you for your service to our country. And the depth of your knowledge and experience really adds so much to this discussion that more and more people want to have in an understanding way. So thank you for what you're doing. On my personal Moolenaar.house.gov is my government website. We also have, through the Select Committee on the CCP .house. Our Twitter is at Committee on CCP. So people can reach out to us in different ways. We have a newsletter people can sign up for and really keep track of all the different work of the committee, and happy to keep people informed. I think it's really important. We have the freedom in this country to have a dialogue and to exchange ideas, and I think we're better for it. So thank you for having me today.
Amen to all of that. Now, for our audience, if you've enjoyed today's China Desk conversation, please tell your friends and consider subscribing and take a visit to our ChinaDeskPodcast.com website. Thank you for joining, and a special thank you to Chairman John Moolenaar for sharing his perspective. Until next time, I'm Steve Yates, your host here at the China Desk.
Thank you for listening to the China Desk Podcast, presented by the Federal Newswire and hosted by Steve Yates. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.